If there's a discomfort, there's a learning behind it if we stay with it long enough. But you have to be able to put yourself in that situation. So come a little bit out of your comfort zone.
Hi, I'm Dr. Lori Stevick Rust. 40 years of sitting with people through their hardest moments has taught me one thing. Our power lives in our courage to be real. This is where we stop pretending and we find our way back to ourselves. I'm glad you're here. Now pull up a chair. This is Becoming Real. In 1964, 77% of Americans trusted their government. Today, that number is 20%. And it's not just our government. We've stopped trusting our neighbors, our scientists, our institutions, each other. We are more digitally connected than we've ever been, and yet we are more isolated than we've ever been. While we all have a role to play in healing our division, women hold a unique power in this work. We are the keepers of the culture, the first teachers, the relationship builders. And as such, we have always had the power to shape the world. Through gender solidarity, we believe that enough of us together can carry all of us forward. That's the mission of the nonprofit Getting to We. To understand our shared core identity as humans and learn to relate to each other without fear. Getting to We was founded by our guest today, and I am pleased and excited to introduce you to Dr. Deborah Plummer. She's the founder and executive director of Getting to We, a nonprofit that is dedicated to transforming us and them into we, especially in high conflict, emotionally charged spaces like racism, sexism, and heterosexism. As a psychologist, university professor, author, and speaker, she's an internationally recognized thought leader. Her work brings a deeply humanist, Gestalt-trained lens to how we understand ourselves as social beings and building the competencies to live authentically across our differences. Becker Hospital Review named her one of the top 15 chief diversity officers in the country. And I'll add one more thing to that incredible list. She's been my friend for 47 years. Now, as Debbie would say it, we went to school together, which we did. She was my high school teacher, and she's still my teacher today. She's my advocate, my mentor, my biggest champion, and my inspiration. Other than that, she's okay. It's my distinct privilege to welcome Dr. Debbie Plummer. My friend, I'm so excited to have you here today because we have so many important things to talk about. And we're going to be using a couple 4-letter words, I'm sure, in our conversation. Things like DEIB, hate, woke. But before we get started, our goal today is to really answer that really big question of, can we trust each other again? And before we get launched into the conversation, I want to first say to all of our listeners out there, my ask is that I know coming into a conversation like this, people are going to have their own strongly held beliefs, ideas, perspectives. And my wish for this conversation is that people will pause long enough to stay curious, pause long enough to listen, perhaps to a very different perspective, whether you agree with it or you don't, but to potentially walk away from this important conversation with a few other things to be thinking about and looking at that might challenge our pre-existing beliefs and ideas. So I want to start the conversation there with the big question of how you got started in this work. You know, I just read your bio to all of our listeners out there, which is big. Did you always think, gosh, I really want to be a thought leader in DEIB? Or tell us your origin story. Like, where did you get started and why are you so interested in this work?
Yeah, I first of all, let me back up and just say tag on a couple of things to what you just said because I think it was so important. First of all, thank you for the opportunity because, I love having these conversations with you, which we have started it and as a result of a conversation started a whole nonprofit. So that part I don't know whether to thank you or not for all the work at my age, but our conversations lead to big things and big impact, which I'm happy about that. I'm so thrilled too about your podcast here and its ability to be able to reach people with these kinds of topics. And particularly this one, because it is a prickly topic. So I want to tag on as well to the invitation that you gave folks to bring actually all of what they think and know and believe because all of us have some DEIB background, whether we it's professionally crafted or not, but
Mhm.
also to make space for the new ideas or just what gets evoked in you or what makes you go, or what makes you go, wow, that's something I never thought about. And just noodle that for a little
Mhm.
bit. So um, that's a good thing for this conversation. So, how I got started, I think, we're both psychologists, and I happen to believe that many psychologists become psychologists just to figure themselves out. It's not, all that altruistic. But that was clearly it for me because as I entered the space of diversity, equity, inclusion, which I really didn't at the beginning, I was interested in multicultural applications of clinical psych to help my client base. But it was also how do I make meaning out of the background that I grew up in? My mom was from Panama, my dad was from Jamaica, so we weren't like many of the blacks on our street who had Southern roots. So I grew up also speaking Spanglish with a form of Ebonics that they call now. It was called Ebonics then, but the African American vernacular. So that's also how I double majored in English because I had to make sense of language too. And then we were Catholic and not Baptist or Protestant like many of the African Americans that I knew. And then my mom had a diversity of people, my mom and dad at our home all the time. White people were there, gay people were there, were friends. And so they had a very diverse group of friends. And so I thought that was the way everybody else grew up until you bump up against all those differences and find that that's not true. And so trying to make meaning of that was really my entry into this space.
Mhm. And what a big space it is.
Hmm.
Let's start with unpacking what that actually means because people say DEI, DEIB, and sometimes I think they're using a language or acronyms in a way that they don't fully understand. Or if they do, putting it in a context where it doesn't necessarily fit. So let's begin by just level setting. What do we mean by DEIB? Because the B often gets missed in some of this, and yet I think that's also really important work. So,
Absolutely. And that's a great question because I think often we do start conversations and we're making assumptions about we're all on the same page with this, and we are not. Because
mhm,
basically, DEIB or diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and the belonging part is one that, we add a lot because it is the intersection of the diversity, equity, inclusion, and how we come to be better humans for other humans, which is what this is about. But in the broadest sense, I look at it as people strategy. How do we manage the dynamics of human differences? So we're talking about people and culture. And we do that all the time, even within our families. You know, I always say my parents were the first um, diversity management teachers for us because their DNA must have been so diverse because my sisters and our family is so, we have so many differences within our family
mhm.
that you just have to navigate. And that's what it is. It's basically people strategy.
So why do you think, well, this could be a much bigger question, but
Okay.
why do you think that what started off as let's make sure that organizations and institutions are paying attention to these principles, to these core belief systems around diversity and equity and including people and belonging and how we in organizations and in our life, why this is so important. And then it somehow got hijacked into something else, which is still a little perplexing to me. Maybe you have some better insight into that than I do as to how we got to where we are. Like, this is not only is it a dirty word,
Hmm.
but you can't use it. I mean, this is the first time I've ever gone out as a speaker to give a talk, and I was given a list of words that I could not use.
Well, hmm.
And I was floored. Like, you mean you want me to talk about important things about human beings and we can't say inclusion? We can't say equity?
Yeah.
So, again, I'm still stuck in the I just don't kind of get this, like how we got so quickly hijacked. Do you have insights into that?
I do a bit, and I think. It's been something that's been brewing for a long time, and it's not that unusual or understanding because when we're talking about equity and inclusion, we're also talking about power,
Mm,
and power dynamics. And so anytime you talk about power and you put that then with resources and how resources are distributed or how they're made available and who gets opportunity or what, then, you know, sometimes not the best part of ourselves comes out and
mhm,
people go back to these kind of survival techniques or greed. And so as we began to recognize the differences and level the playing field, and the playing field was getting leveled, and that's what it's about. It's kind of, as I say, it's an after me, you first. People are okay, like, all right, everybody can be, but, after me, you can be first.
mhm,
And when that wasn't happening, when there was an equality there, or the playing field was leveled, then the dynamics shifted. And so it was about power. And one of the ways in which that happened was especially after President Obama was elected twice. Women were headed to then be also in the highest office. And politics is no more than the exchange of power or how power gets distributed. That's what politics is. And so it became necessary then for those who wanted to maintain power primarily in the hands of white, male, heterosexual, wealthy individuals who then, after me, you first, could then help or just organize and take care of everyone else. And so the first administration, I think, saw that because of democracy, you can't do it all at once. And it kept messing up. At this time, then became more of a push to do it. So the word became toxic just because it was a way to, again, pit each other against each other, all the different groups, and then keep the white male, heterosexual, wealthy group in power. Um, and that doesn't work for anybody,
mhm.
not even the wealthy people. It doesn't work for.
Well, it's an interesting, and I know we've talked about this before, that not all power is built and made the same.
Yeah.
So the power we're talking about here is almost baked into power over. Like, how do I dominate? How do I stay and keep the gap of wealthy versus the poor? And somewhere in there, I think these terms started to be, or the concepts were the leverage. Because, we know that there could be power with and different aspects of power. It doesn't have to be power over, but in this concept and the way we're talking about this, it clearly is power over somebody else to keep the gap going. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think the triggers for that, of course, are identity and trust. Going back to that piece, when when you are secure with yourself, and all of us, that's our life journey, just trying to um, just know who we are and to know where our place is in the world, and stand firmly, be grounded in the world and in our society. And when that gets threatened, then people get fearful. And when you treat differences as a threat to be feared rather than a competency to be learned, like how do you successfully um, navigate a world where you want to be good neighbor, coworkers, friends, all of those things for each other? How do you share those resources in the wisest and most effective manner? How do you go into public spaces and navigate that in a way that is equitable? I always say
Mhm,
that I was taught, and I know you were probably too, all of us, when we are in public space, I kind of give the example, if you want to fling out your arms,
mhm.
you can do that, but if it's going to fling it out and hit someone else, then you need to, be be mindful of that and don't fling out your arms. It's
Mhm,
pretty simple. But
mhm,
now it's like I can fling out my arms and you don't have to be there or you shouldn't be there.
mhm.
And so it is also a very fundamental moral and ethical problem that we're having right now that is wrapped in this notion of DEIB or diversity, equity, inclusion because we have such a um, erroneous understanding of what diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging means.
Well, that's what I was gonna ask you. Do you think somewhere along the way, for people who maybe never really even heard the word or the, strung together like that, like DEI or DEIB, until it became
Toxic.
weaponized, I'm gonna
Yeah,
say.
exactly. Weaponized is a good word.
And I saw some interviews not too long ago where somebody was asked, like on a panel, can you explain DEI to me? Like, what does DEI mean? You're against it, but help me understand it. And the answers were very telling to me. And one of them was really about, well, it means that people got jobs just because of representation. Like, they got that position because they were black and there was a quota, or there was too many men on the board. And so we had to throw in a couple women. It's kind of like they got the job without ever really earning it. And that's how it got all filtered down for people to go, yep, and that's DEI. And that's why we can't have that. We cannot have that. Tell me what you think is some of the biggest misunderstandings in addition to that over all of your decades. I mean, it's got to be maddening to you. It aggravates me. It's got to be maddening to you with decades of this work under your belt, and you watch somebody just go, nope, it's not that. This is what it really means.
It is maddening, and it's also an opportunity that I hope that we can claim and kind of leapfrog over it to be able to get to um, a time when we are rebuilding the trust and the connections and all that's being ruptured is being repaired, all of that. And I think we can. I'm laughing when you gave that example because I was walking in the park and I had on a T-shirt that said, "You are." It was a DEI T-shirt that said something like, "You're probably DEI too." And this older gentleman stopped me. He was white, and he said, you know, he did like this for the shirt, and he goes, but I'm glad I'm not in DEI." And I thought, "Yes, you are, old man." You know, we all will have the benefit of all of what diversity, equity, inclusion is trying to do for us as a nation, as a people, as organizations, as community. If we are blessed to be old enough, enough. It is, and it's also for youth. It's for people. Yes.
Our brain gets hijacked, and it's like you hear a word and another, and immediately it's like, okay, I say this, what do you think of, within seconds? And certainly a psychologist, that free association is very telling, and it is for me here too, because many people, when you say DEI, what's the first thing you think of? People go race. And yet, your story about the old man in the park reminds me that this is not just about race. This is a bigger issue that really shouldn't we all be rallying around equity, inclusion, diversity, and belonging, because it does apply to all of us. So, talk a little bit about why you think that got hijacked so quickly, even in people's minds, and associated only with race.
And that is a great question, and it is truly how our brains work and what people have held on to for a long time, because the roots of diversity, equity, inclusion started with the civil rights movement, which was largely based on race, because voter suppression, just trying to get equal rights,
Mhm,
the being able to go places, desegregation, all of those things were all race based. Martin Luther King, race based.
mhm,
So people will hold on to that, and that's what they think about as diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. However, we know that the underpinnings of race, whether it's any of the dimensions of diversity or aspects of who we are as a human being, whether it's gender, sexual orientation, age, ability, all of those things are part of it. And so those of us who have been in the field and those of people who understand it do understand it is not just about race. You know, race and gender were kind of the lead efforts in this, and that's because we also have a lot of research and a lot of information about that, and also because they're visible. There's a visibility about race and gender
Mhm.
that can trigger for folks, how do I manage this? How do I navigate this if I don't know another person who's Asian, or if I don't know how to manage women?
Mhm.
So that has all been there from the beginning. And yet, we aren't without the education that we need for diversity, inclusion, and belonging, we are going to play into those narratives
Mhm.
that we talked about before that are about power, where we divide us. So when they can say it's just reverse discrimination, or it's people trying to get handouts, or people taking your jobs away, there's no data that supports that. And yet it's something that taps into people's fear, the
Right.
fight, flight, or fear response,
Mhm.
you know, and so then you it's very easy to do and to keep attaching that, and that's what people will hold on to. So if you say DEI, then people think, "Oh, reverse discrimination," or they're giving away my jobs, or they're giving away this, and it's not that at all.
So before we leave the DEI be, because it plays into the next topic that I want us to address, but I wonder, like with all things, when a word gets hijacked and it gets so dirty and tainted, do we ever come back from this? And do we need to? So could we ever start talking about belonging and equity and diversity without using those words? And if we do, does leaving the words behind actually we lose part of the power of the message?
Yeah. It's a good question as well, because I know many organizations are struggling with that.
Mhm.
Some have changed their language, and some gotten more forceful in how they say it, or more committed to
Mhm.
how they say it,
Mhm.
because they don't want people to run away from it. And I think all of those on that spectrum are okay, because as long as you're doing it with intention. And I say that because this is a great opportunity for us to have meaningful conversations about this, to educate, to be able to join and process and engage with others about what this really means, and to them, and not just to have this as a keep it as a prickly topic that people avoid,
Mhm.
but more or less to have the conversation. So thank you again for this episode, because it's so important, and it takes courage, because even for you to just say, "I'm going to have this," people will say, "Oh, well, then they'll label you." They
Mhm.
label what your views are, what your values are,
Mhm.
and they're off to the races then with what they think about
Yeah.
someone, and that's where we are right now. That a hat, a slogan, um, a shirt can put you in a bucket that people get real lazy about in how we get to know one another. So it goes
Mhm.
back to that notion of trust,
Yeah.
but because it's all linked.
I think it was probably, well, it was right after the killing of George Floyd that you and I had a conversation. It was a webinar actually that we did.
Mhm.
And as I was promoting the webinar, I said, "My longtime dear friend," and people knew that I was white and you were black. And I might have even referenced, we're going to talk about trust between black and white women, my longtime friend. I don't even think I hit send and I got responses back going, "Oh, so you got a black friend. So now you're X, Y, and Z." It was like, okay, this is where this conversation got hijacked right away out of the
Mhm.
gate from the conversation that we started to have about social trust. So I want to pivot into social trust because that's where you and I started having some interesting conversations. And as you mentioned earlier, which led to our 136% project, which then led to listening circles. And then that led to our social trust movement. And then that, of course, because you were an overachiever, led to starting of a nonprofit. So talk a little bit about, maybe share a little bit about why we even started on this journey and where social trust fits into that.
Yeah. Uh, I think, well, I know as psychologists, part of the root of that conversation was, how do we bridge that divide?
Mhm.
And I recall having conversations about relationship building and how does that work, and what was going on with the current environment, which is even mild compared to what
I
we are
know.
experiencing now, and how would we make our way back, and believing that trust was the foundation for any relationship, romantic, friendly, professional. Trust is foundational to any relationship that we have.
Mhm.
And having conversations then about how do you rebuild trust after it has been damaged. And as psychologists, we knew that it was a lot of work. And that's when we started to talk, as I shared my thinking about couples therapy and how I began to like doing couples therapy at one point, and you can share your feelings about couples therapy.
Not my favorite.
It wasn't your favorite, which I think then was a difference, and so it led us to talk about why.
Mhm.
What was it about couples therapy that, made it challenging for therapists? And we both came to the conclusion that it was, and I knew this from how I had changed my approach, you get beat up a lot
Yes. Yeah.
when
Yeah.
you're doing couples therapy
Mhm.
because you're either gonna be on one side or the other, because of what you're saying.
Mhm.
And so my way to solve that, and then what blossomed into my really love for doing couples therapy, was putting a fourth person in the room that was called goal. So in other words, that session, I would say at the beginning, we're going to have 3 sessions. We're just going to look at what our goals are, or even if it's one goal. Is it, to have this relationship dissolve, or is it to repair it, or is it to just identify what's going wrong? But we'll spend 3 sessions getting that goal out. And then from here on in, if I say something
Mhm.
that sounds like it's in support of you, then it's really not in support of you, it's in the support of the fourth person in this room, which is a goal. And it
Love that.
started to work miraculously, especially for men, because, they would say something and I would say, "I wanna underscore what's just been said because," and they would go, "Goal." You know? And I it keeps us focused, and then we began to then think about, okay, what were our goals in bringing communities together, knowing that women have historically and in current time are catalysts for change, sustainable change. There's enough research to say we are the first to identify problems in the community, but
Mhm.
also to look for ways to repair it. And we wanted to start with women. So that's the journey for that.
Mhm. So let's talk about a little bit about 136% Project, how that started, what was the initiative and the impetus, and then that led to there really is more division between black and white women than perhaps I don't know if I want to say perhaps we didn't realize. Maybe you realized it. I don't think I realized the numbers were that significant. So
Yeah, you did have a little bit of a Pollyannish, like, "Oh, wonderful,"
what
and
are we talking
also
about
to
here?
prepare you for the backlash that you were also going to get,
Mhm.
in stepping in there, and I wanna again underscore what I said in the documentary that we did, how wonderfully and how defenselessly you have responded to all of that, and it's because you live by your principles, you live by your values. Both you and your husband, Jay, do that extraordinarily well, and I can say that with confidence, not just because I know you both for many years, but because I do this work with a lot of people, and I know that it's not easy, so I don't want to have the listeners even think that, "Oh, this is all you have to do." No, the commitment has to be there. First, you have to want to, then you can. And even then, in that journey of from me to we, there's gonna be a lot of doubt about whether the commitment is there because it's pretty bumpy. It's pretty rough right now.
Mhm.
When we began the 136% project at that time, which was what, 2020,
Yeah.
20, yeah, 2020,
Mhm.
because we spent a full year doing the listening circles, it was not as deep as it is now even,
Right.
and even as divided as it is now, and it was pretty bad back then. So when we think about that, it was because there was n 91% of Black women had voted by in our opinion, by their vote for racial equity, and 45% of white women had not made it a priority at all by their vote. And so we called it the 136% project. But what became clear to us, why it shifted to the Social Trust Project, was that we weren't community organizers. We were not politicians, or
Right.
this was not in the political space. We tend to know that because as psychologists, we look at the underlying principles of human behavior. And so looking at those underlying principles, it was pretty obvious, that what was going on, it was about the politics and the power, but also about how do we relate to one another in the fullness of our identities, and
Mhm.
how can then we grow as individuals in that. So um, w- our effort became clearer to us as we moved on. So it went from the 136% to the Social Trust Project, realizing how deep that divide was between women. And if we were going to start with women as this catalyst for sustainable change, we
Mhm.
had to look at both white and Black, not that other women of color weren't important in
Right.
that dynamic, but that's where we had the research, and it was based on what Isabel Wilkerson in her book Caste would call the top and the bottom of America's hidden caste system.
Mhm. Yep. Yep. And when we started to look at putting the social trust retreats together and gathering Black and white women, the conversations in those retreats really highlighted almost like we're living in a different world at
Mhm,
times, both Black and white women. And it was about honest conversations to go, "Hey, okay, you need to sit with this and let me tell you what my lived reality is and my lived experience without getting hijacked into, but that's not me. Like, I'm not racist or, I'm not this."
mhm.
They were very, very powerful discussions. And we decided to define social trust as both a choice and an emotion. So
Mhm.
let's talk a little bit about when people out there listening to us go social trust, like, okay, who are we trusting? What does that mean?
Yeah,
Talk a little bit more about the actual definition and then how that gets used today. Like where does that apply for people who say, I don't know what social trust is and how do I get it and how do I participate in it?
exactly. And there are some wonderful foundations and research institutes who look at trust, but over the years and going deeper into it, I've noted that the definition that we use, I think is because as psychologists, we're always looking
Mhm.
at both external behavior or the dynamics in the society, but more how do we as human beings interact? So that's how emotions come in there. And then how do we make those choices, which is the cerebral part, the contextual part that may be automatic to help us to act upon what we know to be true, or to act upon um, what our values and our beliefs are.
When you talk about as psychologists, we really looked at social trust in a bigger way with a
Mhm,
bigger lens because what we do know about humans is our cognition follows second
mhm,
to emotions. We like to think that we are just such smart, intellectual people that we reason our way into ideas, we reason our way into beliefs, and that is not at all how it happens. Emotionally, we get charged, whether it's a fear response, whether it's an anger response, and then we cognitively add the why I feel this way. So
mhm.
it's not like we've reasoned our way and then we have a feeling about it. It's the other way around. So I think that's why the concept of social trust being both an emotion and a choice gets to the richness of us just being humans and stop pretending like we're just these intellectual beings who are debating and sparring with one another over intellectual topics. We have a lot of emotion that leads the way before that. So,
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's why people that can understand why they do certain things or they put the cognitive tag on it after, but, yeah, it's a lot to unbundle for
Yeah.
folks.
We've alluded to the documentary, and we probably need to talk about that too. But leading up to the documentary, we talked a lot about gender solidarity
Mhm,
and what it takes, because we do believe, I think collectively, you and I both, that women hold great power. We
mhm.
just don't tap into it. Either we're afraid of it, or we don't understand it, or we don't think it's enough, or there's a whole list of things as to why we don't do it. But when women come together, amazing things happen.
Mhm.
And our thought process was really about, and if we bring Black and white women together in true gender solidarity, with social trust being the leading engine, if you will, that amazing things could happen. What do you still think about gender solidarity? Is it still possible in this crazy world that we're in right now?
I think it's still possible, but I also think it's very necessary. It's not just a nice to have. I don't think we are going to make progress as a nation. I don't think we are going to have productive organizations. I no longer believe that we can even be our full and authentic selves
Mhm.
if we don't know how to make that journey from need to we and how to do it effectively. And gender solidarity is really crucial to that because when I look at even all the trends with women, particularly white women, but there are women of color as well who are in that bucket who, for whatever reason, in terms of their own comfort level or identity, what I would call identity foreclosure, and when that's a psychological term as well, where we just say, this is who we are, this is who my parents were, or this is I've always been. So we shut that down about what it means to be a woman, especially in relationship to a man, and what it means in our society, our role in society. And when we get very fearful, but also anxious and concerned, we want to go back to security. And that security means somebody will take care of us. So it's going to be our husband or our daddies or whatever. And this is my role, and I know how to do this, and I know how to do it well. So, a lead part of what diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging is now is not just the people and culture and people strategy, but is helping people to learn how to live with ambiguity, with nuances, with layers that aren't like so surface. Because that's the society, that's the world we're going to be living in from now to Juvember. We need to do this in a way that's going to support the whole self. And so we keep going back to women as being the gatekeepers for that in terms of culture. And if women can lead that way, and I know that sounds really frustrating, especially for Black women right now. It gets landed on us in ways that aren't fair, that aren't just, and some women are just through, they're just done. Or I hear them keep saying, well, that's a white people thing, or that's a white women thing. They need to do that. They need to take care of it. It's their mess. But it's our mess too, because we're all in this together. And our tagline that we have had since day one practically, enough of us together carry all of us forward. And that might be a bit want to say sounds hopeless, but it's not, because the hope and the opportunity comes that people do like to stay in their comfort zone and like certainty, but they also like possibility.
Mhm.
And so when we think about this as a great possibility and we think about women being creators of that possibility, that's real exciting.
Yeah, I love your optimism in that, because there are days that I think, "Ugh,
Yeah.
but can we really do this? This feels like, pushing a heavy, heavy stone uphill." Back 6 years ago, and
Mhm.
now it feels like that stone even got heavier. So I love your optimism in that. I'm going to hang on to it. But for people who are listening who go, "Okay, I get it." So, we know that there's this divide around language that's being used. DEIB we talked about. Hate, we know, is the creator of a lot of this division. The one that I take the biggest well, maybe I take an offense to all of them, but the concept of woke just literally gives me a visceral response that, like, I literally cannot understand how being awake, aware, and in tune with the needs of other people became hijacked into, "Oh, oh, you're one of those." Because I wanna respond every time like, "Yep, I'm one of those. I actually care about you. I care about your children. I care about my community. I want to learn my history so I don't repeat the history instead of being afraid of it." It's still one that just kind of boggles my mind. So that's my tangent. Do you wanna respond in anything about woke before I ask now about what we do with all of this?
Yeah. I think if we understand it from the authoritarian playbook, it is right there, in the sense of that if you try to keep people dumb, if you try to keep them uninformed, if you try to control the narrative on something, then you can really manipulate them. You can get them to believe anything. You get them not to trust each other. You're even telling them who to hate and who is the one that's responsible. So it's a very predictable formula,
Mhm.
and fear is one of the easiest emotions to manipulate, as you know.
Absolutely.
You know,
Yeah, I did another episode on propaganda and cognitive dissonance because that's
Mhm,
really what's happening. If we really want to digress into this, is a playbook.
mhm,
This is exactly like how do we 101 get
mhm.
people to be on our side despite all evidence against it? And that's a whole nother topic and why I did a whole episode on it because it's exactly what you just said. It's from a playbook. It's not unintentional. So those of us who look at it, sometimes myself even, where I go, oh my gosh, I have to defend again that I care, that if I wear a woke t-shirt, it's like not, it's not
Yeah,
evil. But
yeah.
I
It's
see
about
it
who
for
you
what it
care
is.
about. They just want to manipulate who you should care about
Mhm,
because they have flipped the narrative to mean that if you are woke, that simply means, again, get back to the reverse discrimination,
mhm,
someone's taking your place. It's a not so thinly veiled white supremacy notion
mhm.
as it plays out in our country. And I know
Right.
people want to think, oh, that's back to the 1950s. Nobody's wearing hoods.
Yes, they
And,
are.
this is not the Ku Klux Klan. It's just a very sophisticated current form of it. And
Mhm,
that is what it is. And to keep people dumb. And it's not it doesn't have to do with educated, because I think when they say, "I love the uneducated," they're trying to put you against people who are college degrees and are, because they're saying they're elitist, they don't get you, all of those things, but it's always a twist. But people, I don't care what socioeconomic class you are, people know inherently, good or bad, you know? They know pain, the universal, we know joy and pain. We know those deep human emotions, no matter who we are as humans. And when that gets destroyed, that's our common denominator. And so we can come back to that. And I happen to still believe that most people are good. This is the same country that voted for Obama twice. You
yeah,
know,
yeah, yeah. For anybody who's listening who go, "Okay, I get it." So there's social trust is our goal. How do we bring ourselves together, particularly as women, joining in solidarity to solve what could really be some of the world's biggest issues about division and hate and all that then cascades from that. It's not enough to just say, "Well, we're a pretty divided nation," without seeing the slippery slope of, do you see where that takes us if we let this continue?
mhm,
Like we've allowed them to draw the lines of who is us and them.
mhm.
We didn't get to draw those lines. We participated
Yeah.
in saying, "Oh, okay, then I guess I'm over here in this team because you're telling me I should be in this team." So I think being woke, being aware, being educated, having these conversations, challenging our pre-existing beliefs is so important in beginning to build that social trust, particularly between women and among women. So how do we do that? Because it's one thing to listen to this and go, "Yeah, I love what they're saying. This is great." But it takes work. And you talk about and have a very interesting way that I love about core competencies and how we build those competencies. Talk a little bit about what they are and give us some actionable things that people could be taking away from today that we maybe could be participating in to try to help leverage and change this divide.
Wonderful. Really love that. And I love the invitation because it is going to take work. And
Mhm.
so we do have to be intentional about that. I think before we could just go into public space and we would learn that you put yourself in a multicultural setting, you put yourself going out to places and not being fearful of where everybody doesn't look like you, talk like you, think like you. And you could get a sense of that. Or you could turn on the television or stream something. But there are so many choices now. So we have to make intentional choices. It's work and it's going to be work. So even the choice that you're making for people who are listening to this conversation, that is a good choice. And it is a start. And it's an important start because we both know the power of conversations. And so if you're listening to this podcast, then the next step is to go to your network and say, hey, I just heard this podcast. Dr. Lori was talking about this, and it made me think about this. It's just that's a good way to start, and that's an easy thing to do. But the other things that we have to do with those core skills, what we call now the me to we skills, are holding multiple identities, perspectives, and that is really about how do we stay in spaces or be okay in spaces where we can be who we are and still let somebody else be who we are. It reminds me of that saying, if you don't want to marry someone who is of the same sex, then you don't have to. But you don't mean that you have to eliminate everybody else who is, or make rules that say that you can't marry someone of the same sex. It's being able to hold both of those realities, those identities, and those perspectives in the same space. Everybody doesn't have to think like you, talk like you, believe like you, vote like you. We can hold all of those in the same space. The other one is connecting intention and impact,
Mhm. I love
knowing that my intentions doesn't mitigate a negative impact. I always give the example if I were to wrestle you to the ground and put my foot on your neck and then look down at you lovingly and say, "Oh, you look such an interesting person. I would love to get to know you better." Which one would you pay more attention to, the foot on your neck or my words? So
Mhm.
they both go together, and I won't go into all the other research around that, but we have to pay attention and connect intention and impact. Then the other one is using our social privilege for mutual benefit. And that's really a key in how we are going to get this world to be a better society for everyone. And all of us have social privilege. Well, I want to say most of us have social privilege in one or more areas of our dimensions of diversity. So, race, class, gender, education, ability, all of those have social privilege where it's an ease of expression or ease of life that makes it more advantageous for you to be in that group identity in order to navigate it. And you can do it much more easily as a man, as white, as someone of wealth, as someone who is able bodied. All of those, you go through each one, and people know that naturally. When you look at the dimensions of diversity that you have as an individual, I may not have it under Black, race, or gender, but I certainly have it under class. We certainly have it under education, ability in terms of health, all of those areas, and the dynamics and the underlying principles all work the same way for any of those dimensions of diversity. So we have to be able to use them in a way that helps to support everyone that has that opportunity. Then the last one is how we need to move from certainty to curiosity. You can't be 100% certain on anything, you
Mhm.
know. So even the thing that we are most certain about, it still has a degree of uncertainty. And go back to what I was saying about people and our human nature, we like to live in certainty. We feel more comfortable with that. And so that's why it's easy for people to name or put people into categories and say what you should think about them and value who they are, not value who they are. But we have to learn how to live with uncertainty and know that certainty is not there and that things, especially humans, evolve, you
Mhm.
know? And
Mhm.
so when we talk about moving from certainty to curiosity, curiosity is a wonderful state to be in. Just to remain curious, to remain engaged, to not know everything, to be able to say, gee, I'm sorry. In genuine ways, that is such a freeing way to live that I'm not perfect. No one's perfect. We're not certain. No one has a crystal ball. We're not going to be able to know everything or do everything right.
Yeah.
And so when we're in this together, it can be kind of cool.
Well, and I think, and I love that part because I do think, our brain needs certainty because when we have certainty and familiarity, it makes it feel like everything is predictable, which of course
Mhm.
is not accurate. But that's why I think there are so many people, as you say, when we put people in a bucket, I don't have to think anymore. My brain can relax and I can go, whew, now I know what women do. And now I know what blacks do. And now I know what, immigrants do. And then I don't have to think any further. And that level of anxiety drops because I've given myself
Yeah.
the power of certainty, which of course is a misnomer.
Yeah.
So I love that that's one of our core competencies we have to really work on. How do we do that? How, I mean, at the onset of this podcast, one of the things I suggested and hoped for our listeners was please stay curious. Please stay in this with not, you hear something, you go, oh, well, yep, that's what she says, because that's what all Black women say, or, that's what all white women who have a Black friend say, or, where we hijack it
Yeah.
right out of the gate. So, one
Yeah.
of the things I know is to hear ourselves, to pause long enough, to remain curious. I love what you said is that it could be exciting and interesting to go, I don't know. Help me. Let me see it. As opposed to
Mhm.
feeling like that makes us less than, or I'm embarrassed. How could I not know? I'm ashamed. And I
Yeah.
think that also gets us into trouble, particularly as white women.
It
There's
does.
so
And I
much in
think
this space between Black and white women and trust that there has to be a place where we go, I just didn't get it. Like I missed it. Like I didn't have a lived experience as a Black woman and I missed it.
yeah.
As opposed to, well, now I sound like that stupid white woman and I just don't
Yeah.
want to be that person.
Because it makes then it about you versus what we're trying to achieve. And that's
Mhm.
a thing that you do well because I I want to put out the example. Do you remember when we were teaching a session at the Cape Cod Institute, and I was going on about I can't even remember what the topic was in terms of something about race and gender and diversity, et cetera. And I said, "And Lori, do you want to weigh in on that?" And you said, "I got nothing." And it was so genuine, and it was, I got nothing. It was like, I'm thinking about this too.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and that was a gift because it's genuine. And we all, that's what it means to be the authentic self,
Mhm,
and that's what it means to be, the learner. We have all kinds of opportunities to practice these skills or to
mhm,
learn these skills. I always say I'm going to be learning them 6 months after I'm in the grave, even though I've been doing this work for over 40 years. And that is because our life, our world is a natural living laboratory for how we can do that. And so if you can intentionally, even after this podcast, start to think about places where you live that you can mix it up some, where you shop, where you buy services from, where you get your information from, who you believe and not believe, and the stories that you tell your family, your children, your networks about what life is about or what's going on now, and just try to be a little bit more experimental, if you will, about that. If there's a discomfort, there's a learning behind it if we stay with it long enough, but you have to be able to put yourself in that situation. So come a little bit out of your comfort zone. I would hope that you would also subscribe to the Getting to We's newsletter because that's going to give you lots of opportunities. We're national to keep listening to what you are talking about. Even though this is like the first episode, I believe that you really delved down on diversity, equity, inclusion. I think all of your episodes have been about DEI. You
mhm.
know,
Yeah.
when you're talking about women, when you're talking about gender or geriatric concerns and dementia and men and prostate cancer, all of that is really about how do we support each other in a world where we have differences, you
Well,
know?
thank you for that shout out. I do love four-letter words, and so DEIB is kind of the overarching for a lot of the work because it isn't. what we
Mhm.
think it is. It really is just about being human and
Yeah.
making sure that there's fairness and an inclusion for everybody to participate in this experiment in this planet for this short time that we're here.
Yeah.
There's something that you said that sometimes I swear at you because when I hear your voice in my head after this many years, I go, "Dang it!" When you said, and I want to underscore this, where there's discomfort, there's learning if you stay with it long enough.
Mhm.
Where there's discomfort, there's learning if you stay with it long enough. So when I start to get uncomfortable, and right now I think in the place where our world is, there are a lot of people that I thought I really knew at their core and have learned different things about their values, their beliefs, their ideas of where they sit now. And it creates great discomfort for me. And so I hear your voice and I go, okay, I could run away from this conversation. I could exit the relationship with this person, or I could stay in this enough to understand our differences, even though they are polar opposite perspectives. So I wanted to thank you and curse at you for planting that seed in my head um, but I hope for the listeners that that's one of those things again, when you start feeling uncomfortable, really uncomfortable in a conversation, that's not about safety. I'm talking about discomfort in your experience, your exchange of ideas or beliefs, that if you sit long enough, there is something for you to learn at the end of that. Now, the learning might be, for me, it is, the learning could be, I understand you better and I'm going to make different choices in how we spend our time together. Or I understand you differently and it helps me understand a concept that I'm saying, how can people think like this? Now I think I understand that deeper. Whatever the learning is, there's value in holding on for just a little bit longer. So, as
Absolutely.
I said, I'm going to thank you and curse you for that.
Well, if I
Um,
could say, because I struggle for that with that same, um, experience right now, and I have had to hold on to the fact that the learning is my learning. So sometimes it's not about trying to teach them or learning in the dyad with the two of us or trying to figure them out. It's more about why is this so important to me? Or
mhm,
why did that feel like, ugh, or an ouch moment, or why did that feel like when they said that they stabbed me in the back? Because I don't represent any of those, that group that they're talking about.
mhm,
And so I think it's always an opportunity to learn about ourselves. And you're right, we have to still be psychologically safe. We still have to be able to live our values, but that doesn't mean that we have to stay in the discomfort of the interpersonal or
mhm.
what they are doing. Or we wouldn't want them to stay in if I was doing that to them. The
Yeah,
learning is about ourselves. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And the other competency that you touched on at the beginning of holding multiple realities, I think that's a really hard one because again, we
Mhm,
like to get really clear and bucket people. So and bucket issues.
mhm,
So whether it's about immigration or race or other versions of social justice, it's it's either or right now.
yeah,
Like it's very difficult to go, I can hold two realities and kind of make my way through this. But I think that that is one of the biggest challenges if we really want to get out of us and them.
yeah,
There's
it
got to
is.
be a place where when you look at these issues for me in conversations with people is we really all do want the same thing. Unless you're really pathological, most people want clean air, uh, clean water. They want their children to grow up and be happy. They want healthcare that they can
Yeah,
afford. They want to be able to go on vacations and have some money to put the gas in the car. At the end of the day, we all really want those basic issues.
mhm,
We've just been sold a story that put us into artificial buckets. And my hope at the end of this is we start building that trust between us and going, wait a minute, maybe we, you and me, are not the enemies. Maybe there's something else out here with a different agenda that's the enemy. And if we build social trust and we come together on those shared core values, issues, and beliefs, we stand a better chance of moving the needle because there's more of us than there is of them.
absolutely. And our method is also to encourage people to choose the place that they're most passionate about or that they have most energy about and go after that because it is too big.
Mhm.
This is way too big, and you can feel like you're boiling the ocean
Mhm.
after even this conversation, like, whoa,
Yeah.
but choose the part, whether it's climate, whether it's women's issues, whether it's LGBT issues, or immigration, or whatever, voting rights. Choose the area, education. There's so much now that we can
Mhm.
look
Mhm.
on how do we help support to move it to we. How do we help do that? So choose the area that you have the most energy around and do that. There's still ways within that bucket to still do it in a way that supports you. If you're not take it to the streets kind of person, you can light a candle and put it in your window. You can say a prayer. You can have conversations with your family and network. There's still always something that you can do. We just all have to do something at this point.
Yeah, yeah, because that's the danger, right? We get into a place of feeling helpless, and we know as psychologists, helplessness and that feeling causes us to shut down and do nothing. And
Exactly.
that's the biggest danger, I think, right now that will keep the division and block us from true social trust. So, my last question for you is when you imagine our future, a world for our kids, our grandkids, what do you hope that they understand about one another that we're still struggling with today? Like that they will be a little further along.
I do hope that they embrace ambiguity, uncertainty, layered, and feel so excited about the creative tension that creates and help to take us to a level that we can't even imagine right now. That they live in the space of hope and possibility, and however that turns out is great.
I love that. I love that. Obviously, we have to do another segment. There's just way too much for one episode, but we've alluded a couple times to our documentary, and I want to be able to maybe do a full episode on the documentary, which is called Trust in Black and White. But part of the filming of that, we went down to Montgomery, Alabama, and Selma, Alabama, which gave many of the people the first time look at the Equal Justice Initiative by Brian Stevenson. And anybody who doesn't know his work in his book, Just Mercy, or the way that this man has dedicated his life to justice is so inspirational. He was just here in Cleveland, and listening to him speak was I walked away feeling like, "Oh my god, there's my hope. I found
Yeah,
my hope again." In a person who, if he said he felt hopeless, I would get it,
yeah,
and he doesn't.
yeah,
One of the things that he said, and I love this, is, when he was asked a question, he said that he believes there's an America that is more free, more equal, and more just that's just waiting for us. And I thought, "Oh, he's talking to me. He's speaking the language of he does see that there is a better America. We are that experiment that keeps growing, but it is under there. We need to unearth it, and it's up to all of us to stand up, to stop being bystanders, to step into this work." And I, for the first time in a little while, felt very, very hopeful. And part of what how we get there, he talked about very much what you have spent decades preaching, which is this division is a proximity issue. We have to be in close communication and close experiences with the other, the person with the differences from us, because how else will we know how to move them out of buckets and go, oh, wait, we're the same.
yeah,
We just are different in many other ways, but we really are the same.
yeah,
And so, proximity and being in close contact with people of differences is one of the other action items for us to take forward.
yeah. Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Is there anything else, my friend? Because we tried to consolidate your 4 decades of incredible work in this area. Anything else that you want to leave listeners with that I didn't ask you?
Well, you know what? I'm still noodling that question about the for the next generation. And when you were talking about Brian Stevenson and what he said, because I do think he is very inspiring. And the other um, image that came up for me, and do you remember Clint Smith, who's an author that we had for one of our amazing, amazing inclusion and belonging experiences? And he talked about it, which I find for those of us who've been doing the work for such a long time, as well as our ancestors and our grandparents and everybody else, is that we are chipping away. Do you remember that at the wall? And he said, and our ancestors and our people were chipping away at a wall that they knew that they would never see what was going to be on the other side. you know, and that's that new future, that new environment. We're chipping away, and our work is just to keep chipping. And I felt like for a while there, and I still do, that there's a big chunk of that has been chipped away, but and I do think we're going to make more pace as we kind of autocorrect what's going on, but there's that possibility. There's that hope out there. And so thank you for chipping away. Everybody's chipping, doing their parts. So I really appreciate you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And I do for you. All right. Thanks so much. And for the listeners, in the show notes, there'll be a lot of information about your books, how to get in touch with you, and certainly about the amazing organization Getting to We, how to get on the newsletter, checking out the website, because there's so much, even just chucked on the website, that I think people will benefit from that we couldn't possibly even get near in this short conversation today. So all of that will be in the show notes and people will be able to link to that. So.
Thank you.
All righty. Thanks so much. Thank you for sharing your time with us today. I hope that the conversation gave you moments of pause, of insight, and maybe some things to apply in your own life. If you found it useful and valuable, please consider sharing it with somebody who you think needs to hear this message. Until next time, this is Becoming Real.